Well, hey, good afternoon, folks. Thanks for making time to be here. We've had several outreach regarding the independent economic analysis that I've called for. So we thought we'd just lay it flat by bringing everybody together, and hopefully we can, answer some questions there and really kind of reiterate why this is such an important step in this process. And what let me back up too. Some of this is informed by two things that I heard quite a bit of on the trail, right? Which is one, San Antonio is the seventh largest city in the country. We need to start acting like it. One. Two, we need to address the persistent poverty in our community. I can't think of two better reasons to take a strategic pause on this until we have all of the data and can really lay out for our community the costs, the benefits of not only the potential new Spurs arena, but this overall endeavor. As we've talked about, this is a generational investment. We have an opportunity to use it to address our generational inequities, but we have to take advantage of that opportunity. And I think we do that best by doing our due diligence. Because again, the people of San Antonio will not vote on whether or not they have a new Spurs arena. They are entrusting the city council to make sure that we do our due diligence in aspects of this. And frankly, also help them understand what it means for other things. What does this mean for the upcoming bond project, right? What does this mean in general for downtown? And how have we understood that these projects are in fact the highest and best value for the community? So, and look, the good thing is we have the time to do this. The county, is limited in their ability to call for an election, like as the one that they did. They can only do that once a year. We are not limited in that same way. And I understand, the county has done their calculus and 311 is what they feel comfortable putting forward. As a reminder, they do not have a community benefits agreement. They did not negotiate one of those. So we are in a different spot because we are looking at this not only in the context of the deal for itself, how the financing for the arena, as well though as the other projects that are dependent on how much money, for example, may be allotted from the PFC, which is a critical bucket here. Okay, so we've got the time to do it, and I think the analysis that was presented to us last week shows where we've got some significant gaps. I think what I also just shared with you is as an economic analysis that was also done by CSL, the same firm that did our presentation last week. But you'll note that presentation was done for the city of Philadelphia, as the city last year was contemplating how they could or whether they should fund a new arena for the 76ers, their baseball team. And you'll note that is a very in-depth presentation. I would highlight, they ask very critical questions like we should be asking, can we support two major arenas? And I think what I also appreciated about that analysis is it did a really thorough look at local market conditions, as well as looked at the economic and fiscal impacts to the city, to the school district, as well as to the state. So those are all things that we can have, and frankly, we should have when we're taking such a critical, looking at such a major investment in our community. So that kind of analysis, I think, is really just the starting point for us to have a conversation about how we are allocating our resources as a community. Because, while I don't know how much the new Spurs arena is going to cost. They have asked for 1.3, 1.5 billion. And while we do not yet know how they intend to guarantee some of those, the developments, this is what I do know. CPS and SAWS will come to City Council next year asking for a rate increase. Okay. The first bond to support infrastructure related to the downtown development will be 220 to 250 million. Okay, that's the first one. We also know the implementation of the reconciliation bill, which we'll begin to see the impacts of, will impact our most vulnerable in this community, as we are also grappling with our own budget gap in our city budget. And we also know we have 14 flood projects. It remains to be seen, whether or not we're going to get any help from the state on those. But we do know we've got 14 flood projects that amount to $411 million. And if we wanted to pay for all of that out of the upcoming bond, that's that same bond, right, that would pay for some of the infrastructure related to the downtown development. That may be a source of it, right? There may be something else that I know the city is looking at, but we know it could come out of that same bond. So we don't have endless resources, and I think it's really important that we lay all this out for the community. And again, thankfully, we have the time to do that. There is no rush, and I think it's really important that as we're negotiating on such a major development, that we're doing the due diligence that the people of San Antonio have requested that we do. One of the other things I asked, so again, that analysis regarding the 76ers arena is insightful. What I also asked our city staff to prepare is, a lot of this, again, is hinging on how well the Spurs can guarantee that development. And so I think, if you remember at the last session, I asked Eric if he could just shed some light on some lessons learned from the delayed projects around the hemisphere. And Madison, it was actually your very good reporting from 2023 that says, after years of delays and changes, hemisphere development to start construction this fall. So that's this almost to the date, August 14th, 2023, it's to the date, speaks to a project much smaller scale, but that was several times downsized and renegotiated due to delays, right? So we have some recent examples in our community about how development and some of those things, we really have to ensure that we're learning from those experiences as we tackle this momentous opportunity, if we ensure it as such, right? Okay, so let me see. Anything else I wanted to cover? Yeah, I think that's it for now. I'm happy to take any questions. Andrea?
When do you think is the deadline? Should we have time to do this and kind of make it for letters? When is your personal deadline?
Well, look, I think we've got to have the data to make sure there isn't a hard and fast date at this point. And we have, at the very least, the time to take another 60, 90 days to ensure we have an independent economic analysis. We have talked about with the city staff, potentially a bond next May. And so you'd have to call that by February. So that still is more than enough time for us to do an independent economic analysis and lay much of this flat. And I think have a better understanding of the way in which the economy is going, so we can rightly understand how do we best make these investments in light of the changes in the economy. One of the things, and I shared this at the session, was the PFC, this is the state hotel resources that we are being allowed to invest, and it can only go toward three things. It can only go toward the arena, it can only go toward the Alamo Dome or the convention center. What I was really looking forward from that economic analysis is, hey, help me understand how I should lay out our chips. Right? Help me understand, is the ROI on an investment higher for the convention center? Is it higher for the Alamo Dome? Is it higher for the arena? We didn't get that, right? And so I think that's a key part of this. And I get that's kind of an art and a science, but we don't have either at this point. So I think really making sure that we understand the highest and best use of that money is critical, and we can take time to better understand that. That's not true. That's not true. They did actually. They wanted, so they and you can go back and look at the comments. They did support getting more information. Some folks did want to move forward with the term sheet as well, though.
So some folks wanted to move forward with the term sheet that would be committing that $500 million.
No, it wouldn't actually. So the term sheet is not going to include a number. The city staff has already said that. Yes, we just talked about it. He will.
So he is committed to you verbally to issue a new.
He will put together, and he's going to come back to the council with a scope of what an independent economic analysis would look like. So he hasn't said that he intends to do that. If you looked at what was said on the slide, it said he would come back to us with additional information later in the month. August 21st, there isn't a scheduled vote on that.
So what's
So,
this new analysis that he's going to ask the?
so we don't have an independent. So what he wants, what he's looking for is some direction on the term sheet, right? And so what that looks like is, hey, let's get more information on the guaranteed revenues, for example. Let's see if we can get an actual cost of the arena. We still don't have that. We have this still kind of vague $200 million range. So getting more information on those things, while we also, which is a non-binding term sheet, let's not forget that. That term sheet is non-binding. While we also work to get independent economic analysis. If you remember, the only economic analysis we have right now on the Spurs arena has been provided by the Spurs consultant. And CSL, the vendor that the city staff commissioned prior to this city council, there was not an RFQ that was put out. It was based on previous work, again, that firm has done with the city. So, and if you remember, CSL, they shared that they did not do their own independent economic analysis for the arena. What they did is they reviewed the summary findings of the Spurs consultant. And so I think that is, and I've shared that I think that's inadequate. Because what they did is say, hey, that number, that looks about right. But as you and I both know, it's not just about the number and it looking right. We've got to make sure the methodology also makes sense. We've got to be very clear about the assumptions. As has been laid out in that Philadelphia economic report, they lay out their assumptions. They lay out their methodology. They lay out how it's going to impact, the city's fund, et cetera. So that's the level of due diligence that our community also deserves.
Were other council members invited to be a part of this press conference that may support your strategic policy?
This was to lay out, this was to answer questions about, what I have put forward. It wasn't meant to, didn't do what you're describing.
Have you had conversations with other council members, especially those who last week voted to proceed, voted to move forward? Are they on board with taking the strategic pause that you have continued to ask for? Are they on board with doing another study on this?
I think folks are on board with getting the information that is necessary, right? This additional independent economic analysis, and they shared that.
Are you asking for a different firm, one other than CSL, to do this study?
There are a number of other firms that can do this kind of work, and I have shared one in particular with the city manager. It's called Civic Economics, that has looked at traditionally how these public subsidies, especially impact analysis, can be understood. Right. So there are other firms that can do this. I think it's also really important, though, that even the one firm that we did use, the product that they gave to Philadelphia, the sixth largest city in the country, much, much different in rigor and analysis and data than what we received. And frankly, their analysis for what we received was about several projects, not just one. That product is like over 100 pages. Ours was 29.
So would you support CSL doing that work? You just want to see it more thoroughly done?
I think we need to put out, an RFQ for others to similarly, hey, how would you do this? How would you take this into account? There are other firms that can do it as well, and we should look at those.
Would you support this going to a vote of the citizens of San Antonio?
So.
I ask because the county has already set the venue tax to be on the November ballot.
Yeah, well, so per the charter, right? Per the charter, folks cannot vote on this. You can't vote to appropriate money per the charter.
And the council would need to approve the study. Walsh is going to bring back a proposal.
Yeah, he's going to bring back, we talked about it this morning, he's going to bring back a scope of work and what it needs to include. And I think, what Philadelphia got is a really good starting point. And I think, we also, again, need to understand how that pot of money, the PFC, what can we understand about how we lay those chips out, right?
So why did Philadelphia get that and San Antonio didn't? Because city staff didn't request that?
Well, there wasn't an RFQ. I can't speak to how the city of Philadelphia requested that. If you look at the report, they did that in concert with what would be their equivalent of greater SATX. right? Their economic development group. So I think what they provided is reflective of what they were asked to provide, I think. It's very thorough, if you haven't already seen it.
Do you put that responsibility, though, on San Antonio City staff for not requiring more?
I can't speak to the direction that the previous council provided to the city staff. But as I mentioned, it's a different city council, and we have, I think, different expectations about the due diligence that is necessary for this generational investment.
So it sounds like right now you have a verbal from Eric Walsh that this will go forward, but you need.
We'll do an independent economic analysis, that's right. As they are also continuing to work with the Spurs to get some more fidelity on how are the guarantees going to be guaranteed. Ideally a cost for the arena. I think some were surprised, certainly as I heard, I think some were surprised that an arena, there is no such thing as an arena less than $1 billion. Like, I think folks were surprised to learn that number. And so if in fact, the arena can only, is only possible between 1.3 and $1.5 billion, well then, this is simple math. All of a sudden, that range of what the city contributes is not 350 to 500. If it's a 1.3 billion, you take away the 500 from the Spurs, you take away the 311 from the county, you're at 489, right? Minimum. So that's again, nailing down a cost for the arena is really important because it drives everything else.
So do you have to get council approval? Do you have to get the majority of council members to sign off and say they would like to continue with this additional study?
No.
I've
asked for the independent economic analysis. That is something, again, that we can do in parallel.
So how then do you try to build support for that, to try to build that cohesion when you heard the majority of council last week say, we've got the information we need to move forward?
But that's not what they said, though. What you heard, what folks actually said were folks wanted to proceed, move forward with a term sheet while they also worked to get additional information. I think a key part of that additional information is an independent economic analysis. So we can do these things in parallel, and let's never forget that the term sheet is non-binding.
Can you elaborate on the guarantees piece, what you want from the Spurs as far as more information about the guarantees? What specific information?
Well, how they're going to do it. Like, who are those developers, right? When do you see some of those things? And as I mentioned, and as your reporting rightly notes, right, that those things can get downsized due to delays and renegotiated. So what are some of our backstops to ensure that we protect our resources in our community as much as possible? I think the other thing that was, I think, surprising for many as well is that, the Spurs in the letter that they provided, if you all remember, it was $500 million contribution, it was $500 million in guaranteed development, and then the $60 million in the CBA. And then less than a week and a half later, the guarantees were no longer $500 million, they were $900 million. And good, but we need to understand, if and this is why I asked during that session, if you knew the number was going to be 1.4 versus 1 billion, why not put that in the letter? And Bobby Perez said, oversight on our part. $400 million is 1/10 of our city's budget. We don't make $400 million oversights.
If this additional study came back with largely the same findings,
then great. Then to your
would
point,
you support moving forward with Project Marvel then?
and to your point, I think if an independent economic analysis corroborates the numbers that the Spurs have provided, their consultant has provided, and that CSL has provided and other funds, then it corroborates it, and we can, I think, have the confidence to move forward. However, if it's different, right, then we should also understand that. And we need those things laid out. What were your assumptions? What are your data sources, right? Help us understand how you got to that number, because it's not just the number. We really need to interrogate the assumptions that are being made there to ensure that we're all on board. Again, we have the time to do this. There is no rush. So we should take our time and do this smartly.
Speaking of time, what does this do to a timeline? How long do we think it could be until we see results of another study?
Well, I think what may actually be very helpful is to see some of this independent economic analysis before the November vote. I think that'd be very helpful for voters to see that. I think they'd want to see it.
Do you think it can happen that quickly?
I think it may. I think depending on the scope of what we ask for, I think that's possible. It's possible. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? I'm sorry? Not at this point. I think, again, that goes back to the scope that we would want. But again, these are generational investments. So, we'll make sure that the scope is appropriate for, what we're looking for and what we needed to do. And that's why, you asked for several folks to provide options on what that could look like, and then we make the best decision for our community. Great.
Earlier in the process, Mayor, some of the council members told me that they were concerned about losing the Spurs on their watch. Are you worried about that if there are delays?
The Spurs have indicated that they're going to, and they said actually that they may not need to leave the arena early. So we have the time to do this. We have the time to do this right.
So you don't think there's a chance if there are delays?
There's no delay, though. There's no delay.
Well, delays when we're talking about the current timeline that other council members and the previous council have been working on.
Yeah, but they're also working off of no data. So a timeline with no data, not helpful.
But it does push back the
Yeah, no, but let's be very clear. Let's be very clear, okay? Bobby Perez at the last session just said we may not need to leave the arena early, which means we actually have now much more time to do this. So we should not impose on ourselves artificial timelines, and we should do our due diligence. Thank you.
of them leaving the arena is more than the timeline of Project Marvel overall and its proposed completion date.
Well, I mean, if you look at the timeline, there are several timelines associated with that. Some of the Alamo Dome things are not, those are for like over 10 years from now. So again, we can do the due diligence in particular on this major piece, and I will work with my colleagues to ensure we have that. That's what the people of San Antonio deserve. Thank you.